course, of course, of course. Yes, well, yeah, I was saying that yesterday I was, of course, present all day and I listened, followed your presentation. I saw some familiar faces, so some of you might know me already. I mean, yesterday there was no chance for me to introduce myself. My name is Mina Kavan. I am a postdoctoral research fellow and an adjunct professor in urban planning and urban design here in Department of Architecture and Urban Studies at Polymi. I am also part of this, big family of the researchers working on new workplaces, more specifically on co-working spaces, together with the others that I mentioned yesterday. More specifically in the cost action, I am representing the Italian member of the management committee and working group leader too. So again, maybe I should share my screen. Okay, do I have the, I think you have to give me the, yes, you have to give me the role of a presenter. I don't know who is the guest of, who's hosting this, hello, maybe
Yes,
Alice or
here.
Chiara, you should give me a role of the presenter so I can share my screen.
That's strange because all the meetings should be set in the same way.
Yes. Oh, yes. I just saw it now. I have it now. Okay. Just tell me that you see my screen.
Yes.
So I can go on full view, so you can get a better view. No. Let me see. Okay. Do you have my full screen? Hello?
Yes, we are starting to see it, I think.
Okay, well, I'm turning off my camera just for a better visualization. Well, yeah, I would be presenting, as Chiara also briefly mentioned, about generally about, yes, co-working spaces and the literature, let's say, what we see in the literature and how it is defined, what are the typologies, and what would be mainly, well, this is then overview of the presentation. Sorry, yes.
Mina, excuse me. I can see only a black screen. It's like a black window with it seems like a PDF.
It is a PDF.
Okay, here I can, okay, now I can see it. Okay, great.
Now you can see it.
Yes.
Okay. So, do you have to have the full screen? Because, or should I put it? I think you should see a full screen, right? Hello, do you see the full screen?
We see the, there is still the control panel and this kind of stuff, but it's fine.
Is it fine? Okay, because I can go on a full screen mode, but then if I go on that mode, I think it would be, anyway, let me see if I have other ways of, no. Anyway, okay, but
no,
you see the
This
screen.
is perfectly visible, no worries.
This is fine. Okay, so just to give you a glance and overview of the presentation. First of all, I will be really briefly talking about, the sharing economy and why it is relevant to the topic. Third place is work. Yes, as I told you, definition of and co-workers. Then I would give you a little bit of, numbering and numbers about this trend of co-working at the global level. And then we will definitely talk about the literature in different disciplines and then future lines of research. So, sharing economy. Well, I would like to situate the phenomena of new and emerging workplaces within a wider, let's say, concept. And, again, this is also an emerging phenomenon of sharing economy, which is, again, something that is defined as the ability and perhaps the preference of individuals to rent or borrow goods rather than buying or owning them. Well, since the 2010 onward, we can see this sharing, we can see the term of sharing economy, collaborative consumption, peer-to-peer economy, so on, which they have become popular when we describe the phenomena of this access to underutilized goods and services, and so on. As you can see, well, in fact, this is because it is all because of the technology. Because when we talk about sharing economy, we can see it being visible in, let's say, online platforms. For instance, let's say in digital platforms. So this is actually thanks to advancements in technologies and ICT and so on, which has then enabled entrepreneurs to streamline delivery of services in different sectors, such as, I'm sure you know, of course, the Airbnb, which helps us to, experience co-living and co-housing. So here we share living spaces. Then I'm sure, especially for those of you in Milan and also in other cities, you've seen this sharing mobility, car sharing, bike sharing, and so on. This is also seen, this sharing economy, we can see it, let's say, streamlining in the so-called third places for work, such as co-working spaces, but not only, because we will see when we talk about shared workplaces and third places for work, prior to co-working spaces, we also had other ones that we will see together. So what is a third place? Because you might have seen or you might know already, well, this was a concept that was introduced by sociologists at the, early 80s, when they introduced this concept of the third place to the traditional dichotomy of first place, which is home, second place, which is called as the working place, the traditional workplace, and then the social arenas where people gather for active participation, and then provide a larger measure of the sense of holiness and the distinctiveness. This is how it is defined, third places. So they are defined as, public or semi-public, semi-private spaces, such as, cafes, bars, libraries, also churches, school, some of the specific, let's say, university places, and so on. So, and also in a publication by Martins, he defined it. This space. He underlined the importance of that. Of these third places for work. Also, he added open spaces such as parks and pubs, which are open, which they are kind of spaces that are emerging in creative lifestyles, and they are part of a complex network of spaces that are used and really important for digital production and the digital era. Again, about the concept of third places here, more specifically for work, of course, before going into talking about co-working spaces, we should know that these spaces, more technically, they existed even before that. As you can see in this chart, we have like business incubators, hacker spaces, fab labs, maker spaces, which they existed before, let's say, the rise of co-working spaces, which it was technically around 2005 and 2006 in the US. But some of the scholars, they actually situate these innovative and collaborative spaces for work within a wider collection of, third places for work, learning, and play. If you see in this, let's say, diagram, we have this, you can see, well, I'm not going to go in deep into this, just to let you know that, because we have also fab labs and maker spaces, which they are also considered as collaborative spaces, but they are more tended towards learning and, using manufacturing and so on. But then for the co-working spaces, they are mainly like individual workplaces, and where you basically go and rent a desk on a temporary or basis or whatsoever, and that is your, let's say, official working environment. So, but what happens then? Again, in order to understand what happened, that even the world needed these co-working spaces. So again, I mentioned beforehand, technological advancements and, you know, the ICT has enabled this spread of sharing activities, and let's say hope the acceleration of the diffusion and whatsoever. You know, we talked about the digital sharing platforms, you know, the sharing economies and so on. But what happens is that the possibility of, so there is the possibility now to work from different locations thanks to these, let's say, technologies. So what happens is that working is becoming, so when we say that the word of work is changing, it's basically working is becoming less and less dependent on distance, time, and space. And the borders between private homes and productive spaces and socializing, you know, areas are becoming less evident. So what happens is that working is becoming more flexible. So we are going more towards a more flexible styles, which is in, when we compare to this rigid office hours that we are used to. So here we see the rise of smart working, digital working, remote working. These are, you know, the keywords that are, you know, buzzing, and you will hear them. We will talk about this, repeat this on and on, even in this workshop. So, but what happens also is that it's true that the ICT and the technology helps us to have a more, maybe more flexible workplaces, or let's say flexible working styles, you know, as we see in the self-employed and freelancers. But what it seems that they also need social and professional interactions and networking in order to, also because of the risk of isolation that we see that I saw some working on well-being issues. This is also goes under that. So what happens to those? Okay, so they need to, you know, overcome this issue and to help them increase their meeting and networking opportunities. So we can situate co-working within three, let's say, three functions. So creative knowledge working, independent working, and various forms of self-employment, as you can see in this diagram. So what happens is that when we talk about co-working, it's not just about physical space provision. You can find that even at your home. But here we are talking about a sense of community, establishing a community. Actually, this was a buzzword that was also mentioned yesterday. So in a co-working, the idea is to work alone together. Okay, this was also a concept that was introduced by Spinozzi. We will see later on that it considers like sharing working environment and work. I mean, you work independently, but sharing this working environment with the others. And this will help you, you know, mitigate the issues of isolation and help the let's say, independent workers to increase their opportunity to for business opportunities and so on and so forth. We will see later on. So before going into, again, co-working spaces, which is the focus, the actual focus of this presentation, I would like to also introduce this typologies of collaborative spaces, because what are they? Again, this is a bigger umbrella term, but then here we can also put Fab Labs, makerspaces, hackerspaces, and so on, together with, of course, co-working spaces. They are like, they all offer open access to resources. So this is the common, let's say, a feature among all of them. But they have also four main settings. So they are characterized by openness and collaboration, triggered by knowledge and skill sharing. This is really important as they use common tools and platforms. This is very much ensured, let's say, in these environments. And then self-organized. Invention and technology places a key role. This is also, again, another buzzword, okay, just to have in mind. So taking into account these settings, four types of spaces, again, I'm referring to a publication by Capdevila. He is also one of the prominent figures in the studies on co-working spaces. So he talks about 4 types of spaces based on these 2 elements of the governance structure. What does that mean? Is that like the hierarchical character of organizations, which can be either top-down, related to large firms, or bottom-up strategies, community movements or grassroots initiatives and so on, with respect to the actor's level of interaction with the system. So this is the first element. The second one would be the approaches to innovation in terms of either exploration, so, productivity, efficiency, and so on, or exploitation, which here we mainly talk about creativity and experimentation, acceptations, or failures. So based on that, so if you look at this diagram, I just invite you to have a look at, I put it in the red line. So co-working spaces lies into this. So it's a bottom-up approach, okay? And when we talk about the approaches to innovation, we are mainly in the category of exploitation, so which is the creativity, okay? Just to make you understand how important these co-working spaces are becoming at the global scale, I just invite you to have a look at these 2 graphs that shows the number of co-working spaces and their members worldwide from within the past 15 years. I mean, their first appearance in 2005 and until this year. Of course, the numbers for 2020, they are projections, and they were projected before definitely the COVID-19 crisis. But we will see how this would react to the rise, to the appearance of COVID, whether it would be lower than this, the number, or higher. So if we look a little bit about the numbers, so we had in 2005 only 3 co-working spaces, which I told you they were in the US. So that was where they were born. And currently we have more than 26,000. Okay, this is a global scale. And before I forget, these numbers are from the global survey done by the Desk Map. I mean, this initiative were the first one who they are still, monitoring the co-working spaces and the numbers and the business models and the growth and so on at the global scale. Also about the members, now it's been, to be that we have around more than 2.5 million working in more than 3.5 million working in co-working spaces. About the age groups, I also find this very interesting, just to make you understand what age group they are more interested. In fact, they are more than 60%. They are in their until their 30s and 40s. Okay, and then of course only 3% 60 over. We don't even. This is something that we expect. Okay. Expect more young, let's say, solo workers or independent workers or young entrepreneurs, startups, and so on to be attracted to co-working spaces. So this is only to give you a glimpse of what age group we are concerned about when we talk about co-working spaces and co-working. So, and who are the co-workers? You might also hear this buzzword all throughout this workshop. So they are technically those who occupy a desk or on a casual or temporary basis in a workplace shared with others. So this is the general, let's say, definition. They can be categorized as freelancers, micro businesses, employees, or self-employed workers. So also entrepreneurs, dependent contractors, consultants, and so on. Another interesting thing is that these emerging workplaces, co-working spaces, they are attracting diverse professional profiles and competencies ranging from creative industry, guys, this is really important, such as designers, architects, journalists, and etc. Also engineering and digital sectors, IT, software developers, consultants, and so on. We can also categorize, when we talk about co-workers, they can also be divided into three main categories based on what they earn and what they are seeking from co-working spaces. So utilizers, they are those who only need the, let's say, the working space and what it offers in a sense as a more like an infrastructure, okay? They are those who are also interested about learning. So they are learners. So, this knowledge exchange and knowledge sharing that I was mentioning beforehand. Also, attending events, taking part in the courses provided by co-working space and so on. The other ones are instead socializers, those who are, they're actually looking for a recognition and acknowledgements. They are looking for, making networks and to get to know others and, socializers. So these are the three groups of co-workers. Again, in order to, this is just to give you an, it's just to confirm what was mentioned beforehand, okay, about the profile of the workers. So the employment status, again, here, the numbers are, the data are drawn from the desk map. So you can see that they are mostly freelancers, more than 50%, of course, but then we have also entrepreneurs of companies and so on. But these are data are a little bit old, 2020. It should be updated. Unfortunately, I couldn't find at the same level more updated ones, but I'm sure it should be somewhere available. So it could be interesting to see how it is, this, let's say, the share of employment status may change in co-working spaces currently in more recent years. Going into defining co-working spaces, well, as you know, when they started to become famous worldwide, they were more, let's say, advertised in the media. So so if you, a couple of years ago, if you just Googled co-working spaces, the first thing that would come is like the list of co-working spaces and so on. So it was more like something that you would see in the media rather than the literature. So a definition that I find interesting is from this Creative Wallonia, which is again an initiative of, I think, 12 co-working spaces in Belgium or whatever, that they are promoting this co-working space development in that region. So, and they define it as a space which is a hosting, working, and meeting place for entrepreneurs who are carriers of projects and ideas and wish to share with them with the others. I would not go reading everything, but something that I would like to see is the last sentence, which is through co-working, collaboration between actors is encouraged, and in this way an innovating ecosystem is generated on the local level. So please take into account, have in mind the buzzwords, the keywords that are popping out here and there. Again, an innovating ecosystem, innovation here is a keyword, which is something that we will see again. But regarding in the literature, well, we will see again the rise of the academic literature on co-working spaces. Is that since there we can see since 2012 so on that we see scholars becoming interested in studying this topic. So just to give you a definition, definitely Spinoza, because this work is the most cited one. He's from the sector of rhetoric and writing, so it might be far from others, but not really, because the nature of this topic is really multidisciplinary. So this also allows us to work and to be able to interact with people coming from different backgrounds. So he defined it as an open plan office environment in which they work alongside other unaffiliated professionals for a fee. So this was a very basic definition. Capdevila, he is, again, I also mentioned, he is one of the prominent also figures in the sector of business and management. He defines it as localized spaces where independent professionals work sharing resources and their knowledge with the rest of the community. Again, Anita Fuzzi, she would be also giving you a lecture He is also a good colleague of ours and within the network, of course. She is from the management discipline, and she refers to co-working spaces by when she talks about it, referring to 5 major values of collaboration, community, sustainability, openness, and accessibility. Maurice from from geography, he calls it co-working spaces as a potential of serendipity accelerators. So beyond the room, beyond the room layout, co-working is something, it's a spirit, it's a lifestyle, and so on. Let's go to, and then you would see others. So in the technology, of course, they also have a similar, you can see the keywords coming here and there. I also added the definition that we, together with Professor Ilaria Mariotti on a published work, referred to co-working spaces. We underlined co-working spaces characterized by the sense of community, not only inside the workplace, but also when it is inserted into the neighborhood to create local communities. Okay. Now, typologies of co-working spaces. I think I should go a little bit fast because I have 15 minutes, but then we will give you, I'm almost not really done, but then I have to go a little bit fast. So a typologies of co-working spaces, I will go really fast through these. And then you will get the slides, and please go, because this is why I put all the references. So I invite you to go and study them if you are interested. This is above the references that they were given to you. So what is important when we talk about typology of co-working spaces, that they are maybe defined differently from one context to the other. Okay, so for the case of, like, for instance, for Barcelona, and it's written not correctly, it's Barcelona and Paris, Capdevila shows that co-working spaces are primarily owned and managed by small private local startups. So this is for that context. In the case of Milan, they are again mainly by they belong to the private sector, but here the role of municipality is quite strong. Okay, in promoting and investing, okay, in the development of co-working spaces. You can see the detailed works. Professor Mariotti, she will go through this in the next presentation. In the Helsinki, we will see that Mina Di Marino is one of the other lecturers that she will talk about this, of course, that even in this case, the role of public is really important. So they are private, but then let's say being incentivized by the public. Again, in Australia, they have like encouraged by both public and private flexible work organizations. In the case of Finland, there was a very interesting study by Kojo and Nenonen in 2016 that they, based on 2 axes of a business model and the level of user access to the places, they identified 6 kinds of co-working spaces, considering a public, semi-public, and private, okay, and then non-profit making and profit making spaces. So this is something that you can also have a look at. I would go a little bit fast. In the literature, I put this slide because I think that it might be interesting for many of you who come from a design background, architectural background. So when we talk about the layout, the spatial and design factors, there are 5 main factors has been underlined in the literature, like openness. So the percentage of the total area that is visually open, okay, with no formal walls and architectural barriers. A variety of different spaces, like for instance, if you have like conference rooms to relax, a kitchen, spaces for coffee and meeting, and so on. Flexibility. It means that whether, to what extent users can easily change, the workplace by adjusting the furniture, moving it, adding or removing some barriers, and so on. Territoriality. It means that a sense of belonging, so the user can come into the space and sit on any desk, like feeling that they are, they are not taking somebody else's space. Access to private rooms. So whether you have the ability to either rent or access some specific room. Well, these are, of course, some key elements that we can discuss whether we agree upon these elements or not, of course. So the phenomena of co-working spaces, again, in the literature, this was something that I was saying about this rise. As you can see, in 2012, we only had one. And in 2000, well, this is these numbers, I just tell you that these are drawn from, this is a study, a systematic literature review that I did based on Scopus database, okay? Scopus is a database that gathers and collects peer-reviewed papers. So these may not include, I don't know, maybe some paper proceedings or some unpublished papers or some book chapters or whatever. So these are only peer-reviewed publications within the database of Scopus, okay? And it was a research that I did with some keywords on co-working spaces, using different, because you know that we write co-working hyphened and non-hyphened, which the non-hyphen one, of course, it's more preferred. But then using these keywords, I came across around 170 papers at that time. As you can see, it has a dramatic rise. It is still young, this literature, but it's rising dramatically throughout this very few past 7 years. Also, this one which shows the origin country of the publication. As you can see, more than 70% are from Europe and UK, though the phenomena came from America, the North, let's say US and North America, but they are slightly falling behind the Europeans in, publishing on this topic. But then again, something that I also mentioned beforehand, it's about the variety of the disciplines of working on this. But then we see that in the business and management sector are the ones who are taking the lead. We have the economic geographers in the planning, geography, architecture, economics, social studies, and sociology. I just put this for you maybe later on. If you are interested in a specific, say, discipline, you can have a look at some of the readings. So about the different, well, of course, from this abundance of literature, which is growing, especially in the past 2-3 years, I chose the keyword community and community making, and just picked a couple of articles which I think they are important to consider when we talk about sense of community and community making within co-working spaces. The most recent one is from Clifton, London, published in the Futures, and they talk about the emphasis, the rise of remote working because of the growing knowledge economy, arguing that a sense of community within these spaces are a crucial element that may facilitate cooperation as well as collaboration and knowledge sharing among co-workers. What this is the outcome. I just put the outcome of their study, which is again an empirical study in the case of Wales. So please go and have a look at this article if you are, of course, interested in the topic of community making. Again, in the business studies, in a study by Garrett et al., they also discussed the sense of community as a solution offered by co-working spaces to overcome the issue of social isolation, which we mentioned beforehand. So individuals can satisfy their needs for social interaction, maintain their desired autonomy, independence at the same time. So again, here, this is more, again, a study which published very recently, which was the focus was again on the sense of community within these spaces. The publication that I also mentioned before, I think a couple of slides ago, was the one that we did on the case of, we published in the Journal of Territory on the case of Italy. Okay, and it was we presented the findings of an empirical work that we did, on co-workers in Italy. So we handed out a questionnaire to, and then we received, let's say, answers of this questionnaire of 312, if I'm not wrong. And based on that, and on the concept of proximity, unfortunately, I don't have time to go in deep on that. We try to understand how the insertion of co-working spaces within the community, the neighborhood, can create this local communities. Okay, And I mean, based on the answers that we got, so this is like a perceived, okay, from a more perceived point of view, okay. So, and then the other one, which is again a very recent one by Spinozzi, he specifically worked on community. He added again on the empirical, so this is again an empirical study. But here, with the point of view of the managers of co-working spaces, that how important this community making can be for the managers, and using a specific, let's say, kind of a community, type of community within the literature, he talks about these for various kinds of activities, of course, based on 3 criteria: structure and division of labor, nature of co-worker and managers perspective, relationship and relations, and nature of co-worker relationships. So this is, so he discusses that we can have, based on these 3 criteria, okay, considering the relationship between managers, workers, different kind of communities. So just to conclude about the future lines of research on this model of flexible workplaces alone. I've repeated several times about empirical studies. So from a methodological point of view, many studies are like, most studies are limited to, we have very limited number of comparative studies. So they are mainly focused on singular contexts. So it's important in the future on to have more comparative studies, you know, between countries, cities, regions, and so on, which will essentially like help us, guide us to comprehend the spatial and cultural factors in creating different typologies of co-working spaces. Which, I mean, I also told you that when we talk about really context-based, but it's quite interesting to see how they are confronting these places within different contexts, which again, of course, it's been characterized by spatial and cultural factors and so on. Another line of research would be like, for instance, here, something that we know, that there is this distinction. I mean, a policymaker, it seems that from the literature, it also, we know that many of the policymakers, they don't still acknowledge the importance and the potential of these workplaces. So we know this because public policies are still scarce and usually limited, you know, to general funding schemes, supporting business development models in general. So maybe future lines of research can be more like a joint and interdisciplinary studies that can bridge this gap and you know, offer and provide these findings, which can lead to design of a more tailored policies. And of course, we should not forget about the current situation that we are all in, you know, so we should study, we should understand, because this COVID-19 pandemic crisis that has, of course, affected every bits and pieces of our lives. It has also changed and affected the nature of working in a physical space alongside with the others. And I was again reading a report from the WHO for the World Health Organization, that this situation would unfortunately be like this. It would not go back, let's say, in a short round. So we should think about also the future and how we can continue working alongside each other in different models. So more empirical research is needed to, first of all, understand the impact of this pandemic crisis on shared workplaces. And more importantly, maybe to answer the question of what would be the role of co-working spaces in the post-pandemic era. So I would like to conclude. I mean, I would like to close this presentation with this image that I like a lot, which compares, I mean, 2 sides of smart working and working at home, you know, especially for women, with those, you know, the ones that are maybe enjoying it and the other ones which have kids like myself and, of course, maybe most of you. But then it's something that, I mean, smart working allows us to continue working. So we should grasp it and then adapt it to the situation. Thank you very much. If you have any questions.
Thank you, Mina. It was
Thank you,
very
Mina.
interesting
Yeah.
and inspiring image here at the end. Yeah, there's a lot of work
That's
and
our
research
life.
to do in order to mitigate those unpleasant effects, let's say. Even though, of course, the
Yes,
kids are wonderful.
of course.
Ilaria, do you want to start to sharing your presentation? We're perfectly on time.
Hi.
Sorry. Problem with logistics, family logistics.
Kids
my
again.
God. Yes, kids making noise and so on. Okay. So thank you very much. I will share my screen. I hope you don't hear too much noise. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, good. Okay, welcome everybody. Give me, so I have till 3 o'clock or a bit less, Chiara?
I'm sorry, I'm checking the...
Yeah.
Yes. It's till 3 o'clock, so
okay.
you have
Okay, so
bit of space.
Okay, so I will try to explain you about the location factors of co-working spaces and with a focus on Milan. And later on, we will give you a list of co-working spaces that you, as in groups, will be able to analyze and to study. So I will give you some ideas and some information about the location factors of co-working spaces in Italy in general, let's say in Italy and in Milan. Some of them will be analyzed by you. So I will go on quickly about the topic of co-working spaces because Mina did a very broad and very clear overview of what is a co-working space. And in this presentation, I will explain you where they are located and which are the location determinants of co-working spaces, because co-working spaces, as concerns their location behavior, are related to the location of services. So I will try, since I'm an urban and regional economist, I will just go back to the literature, to the location literature briefly, and then I will try to tell you which are the main location patterns of co-working spaces, also because you will have to study them. And you will have also to think about co-working spaces as alternative for remote workers, as an alternative for companies, firms that during the COVID pandemic are asking to their employees more and more to work from home. And working from home is not easy. Now, in this moment, I'm in the seaside, where I have a little apartment, and my mother is taking care of my kids that are 10 and 6. And but now they came back for lunch, so I'm on my bed working. So you can imagine that in this place where I am, should be very interesting, should be very important to have, for instance, a co-working space where I could have been now making this presentation. But okay, I'm home. So home, the house, as we also Mina Di Marino will talk about, is not the best place to stay. And co-working spaces can be, during the COVID pandemic, can really represent an alternative. So we will speak about what are the location determinants, which factors are important for the attraction and retention of the creative class and creative industries and co-working spaces, Why we are talking about creative class and creative industry? Because as you will see, a large majority of co-workers, people, employees, workers that work in a co-working space belong to the creative industry, and they belong also to the creative class. And then we will also talk about the issue of people climate. People climate that is considered as soft location factors that are is important in terms of location decision making. Okay, I will go on about this because Mina has already said this. And I refer to the location factors, to the literature on location. According to the literature, the location factors of a firm, and the firm can be a manufacturing firm or a service firm, and now we are talking about service firm, can be divided into economic factors, the traditional location factors, but are traditional even the geographic infrastructural factors, also the normative political factors, and then are becoming more and more important the qualitative soft factors. As I said, I'm a regional, urban and regional economist. Therefore, my discipline belongs to the period when Hazard stated that space matters. So the economy can't be analyzed, studied, considered without taking into account space, because the development is different according to space. So you can have areas, similar areas with similar in terms of geography and infrastructure, in terms of position in the world, but with a different development. Why? Because several are the factors concerning, for instance, the social capital, concerning the level of entrepreneurship, concerning also these economic factors, the infrastructure where I am, and so on and so forth. So space really matters. And we will see that space matters also for co-working spaces. So within the economic factor, we have agglomeration economies. Concerning urbanization and localization economies. So localization economies are typical of, for instance, of the industrial district, of the clusters. What does it mean? It means that firms specialized in the same sectors are located next to the one to the other. This is typical of the, as we said, the Italian industrial district, but this is typical of Silicon Valley, for instance. Urbanization economies, we have urbanization economies when we are in a city, because in the city there is an agglomeration of firms specialized in different sectors. And we have capital there, we have institutional capital, we have education, so we have universities, schools, we have health infrastructures, we have transport infrastructure, and so on and so forth. And thanks to the agglomeration of these firms in the same sectors, we can have knowledge spillover. Therefore, we will have advantages related to the reduction of costs related, for instance, to the search of a new labor force. If I am located in a creative area, let's make the example of Milan, of a global city. If I'm located as co-working, let's say, in a creative area where there is the fashion industry, there is the design, it will be in a way kind of easy to find skilled labor force specialized in that specific sector. Then I will try to go fast because some of you are also geographers and economists, so I will, but if you have a question, please interrupt me. Then an important economic factor is the market size and market potential. So the customers, the number of customers I can sell my good, that can be a good or a service, skilled labor force availability and the cost of the skilled labor force, land cost and availability of premises. Now, there are some areas where real estate prices are much higher than in other areas. Government incentives, also about this. So there are countries where co-working spaces could get incentives. Specifically in Milan, co-workers could get incentives from the municipality in terms of voucher for 1 month, to rent for 1 month the desk. Other costs. Geographic infrastructural factors, so the geographical shape of the territory and the accessibility. If I'm located in a city, in a big city, the accessibility to local public transport will be better than being located in a remote area. Then we have normative political factors like city and town planning, labor market, environmental regulation. This is typical, no, of the internationalization, for instance, where if multinational firms that invest in China or in India, for instance, invest to reduce labor costs, but they can also invest for skilled labor force, because these developing countries are becoming more and more attractive also for skilled labor force. And then we have, and this can be, these first 3 groups can be considered as a business climate. Hard factors are very much related to the decision making of the entrepreneur. But then more and more, even the people climate are becoming important. The soft factors that are very much related to individuals in the creative economy. Usually there is a correlation, a high correlation between the skills and also the let's say the skills of the labor force of the people and the income of people, and their demand for quality of life, quality of services. When with the personal considerations, I refer to the fact, for instance, when I was in the Netherlands, I did my I didn't talk about myself anyway. I did my PhD in the Netherlands, in Groningen, in the north of the Netherlands. I remember my PhD in economic geography. I remember that when we made a survey to firms, to entrepreneurs, it came out that there was an area very close to Schiphol, the airport, but with a postcode that was different from the one of Amsterdam, no? And the entrepreneurs weren't very happy to locate their business there. Why? Because it's important, no? It's important to be in Amsterdam. It's important to be in Paris. It's important to be in London. And because the premise, I mean, the building of the headquarters must be, no, in the big city, in the big global city. On the other side, when we made interviews in London, the location of the office of the manager was very much related to the location of the school of their children, because he had to go to drive, let's say, to go with the children to school by bike. So these are the personal considerations, let's say, that are becoming more and more important. So business climate, let's say that are with business climate, we can consider the traditional location factors. So, according to which the theories of regional development have been based on the assumption that people follows jobs. While with Florida, in the last 20 years, in the last 10 years, what came out is that the economic growth is also based upon its creative class, and what people think is important. It's important the quality of life, it's important the quality of premises, and therefore people climate is becoming more and more important. People climate relates to the intangible condition of a place, including urban amenities, such as quality of life, urban atmosphere or city buzz, levels of ethnic and social diversity, the quality of culture and social facilities, and the levels of tolerance and openness of the population. Besides, there is also a high degree of overlap between home location and work location. Why? Because people understood more and more that going to working close to the home means to save time for traveling. And traveling can be dangerous if you travel by car. Means loss of time, can be now during the pandemic. You can imagine how traveling, how commuting is risky. Okay, so the creative class by Florida is very much, Florida finds a strong relationship between the three T. So technology, tolerance, and talent. Technology means a strong, competitive, knowledge-intensive industry. These are very much related to talent. So the concentration of people with a high level of education, so skilled labor force, or who are in creative occupations, which can help innovation and entrepreneurship, but of course talent is very much related to technology. And tolerance. Tolerance meaning what we were saying before, not the soft factors, the quality of place, openness, cultural diversity, cultural and welfare amenities, and so on. So if we talk about creative industry, and we talk about creative industry because even in our survey about Italian co-workers, we found that about 75% of co-workers are part of the creative industry. The creative industry is composed by, there are several classifications, okay? But it's composed by, let's say, these sectors. So from advertising to architecture, engineering, design, arts and craft, publishing, fashion, also creative research and development, photography, and so on. This can be divided into traditional cultural industry, publishing, music, architecture, or technology-related creative industry, R&D, ICT, advertising. The creative industries tend to locate in areas where creative people co-locate in high amenity environments. So see, this is another definition saying that creative industries locate where there are productive amenities, and with the term productive amenities, we refer to good access to clients, specialized labor and firms, universities, transportation, good accessibility, let's say. But also to non-productive amenities. So let's say that the productive amenities can be very much more related to the traditional hard factors, while the non-productive are more related to soft factors, good access to urban amenities such as restaurants, cafes, shops, cultural and entertainment, good environmental quality. There is a literature that is developing. Let's say when we started with Mina Akavan studying the location of co-working spaces, there were a few studies, but now the number of studies increased. Here there are some. What we can say is that the majority of studies state that co-working spaces are an urban phenomenon because co-workers work in the service industries, therefore they need to be central, relocated in a city where there are agglomeration and specifically urbanization economies, where the accessibility is good, where there is market size and market potential, where the quality of life in terms of cultural, for instance, cultural supply, is high. But there are more and more studies also exploring the location of co-working spaces in peripheral areas and in small and medium-sized cities. For instance, Anita Fuzzi, that will make a presentation to you, she wrote her PhD thesis on the location, on the analysis of co-working spaces located in peripheral areas in Wales. So let's say that co-working spaces have been mainly found in major urban locations, but are more and more developing also in small and medium-sized cities and also in smaller cities. Now I show you a map of the research that I did with Mitna Akavan and some other colleagues of the Polytechnic of Milan. This has been research has been founded in 2016, I think, if I remember correct, by a FARB project founded by my department, the Department of Architecture and Urban Studies. And we mapped the co-working spaces and maker spaces in Italy. At this, there were 500, didn't write it, but 549, I think, co-working spaces in Italy. Here in this map, I show you only the co-working spaces, not the maker spaces. And you can see a high concentration, so about 25%, 20% in Milan. In generally, the concentration is high in the in the larger cities, and about 50% of co-working spaces are located in metropolitan areas, with Milan about 20%. So you can see a kind of heterogeneous, let's say, location. With 42% in the northwest of Italy, but you see Lombardy now with Milan registering about 100 co-working spaces at that time. Now there are a bit more having the majority. Then followed by Piedmont means Turin, mainly, Lazio means Rome, mainly, and Tuscany means Florence. So then recently we made another analysis. Anyway, I don't show you the econometric analysis we did to understand the location factors of firms in Italy. But what we found is that, yes, about 50% of co-working spaces are located in the Italian metropolitan cities. And that the main location factors are urbanization, localization economies, market size and potential, high share of skilled workers, concentration of innovation, because we ran the analysis at the NUTS3 provincial level. So we found a concentration of co-working spaces in provinces characterized by concentration of innovation in terms of patents, projects, prototypes, and design, concentration of smart services and high value-added services and technologically advanced, increase of number of jobs in services, total investments and medium-low district intensity. So co-working spaces are not in the traditional industrial districts areas, but are more in the metropolitan cities. Now we have a look at the analysis we ran in 2016, 2017. And then we ran another analysis more recently. This is the location of the purple dots are co-working spaces. This is the map of Milan divided into nuclei di identità locale, so local identity units that can be considered as large macro neighborhoods. In Milan, there are 88 of these macro large neighborhoods. So we analyzed the location of these co-working spaces, and we made a survey to co-working managers. Now, to understand the location factor, to understand which were their facilities they were offering. And we found that co-working spaces were mainly located in high population services density areas, NIL, with hosting universities and research institutes. This is also interesting for the knowledge spillover, no, between students or young graduates moving to work in a co-working space, and of course high accessibility to local public transport. But then I will tell you more about the location factors. The co-working spaces we analyzed that were 98 at that time, and we put in the reference list a paper written by myself, Carolina Pacchi, and Stefano Di Vita, published in the Journal of Urban Technology, describing this study, which were the main sectors of the co-working spaces in Milan, mainly in the creative industry, let's say. So we have architecture and design 80%, communication 8%, digital 10%, the 48% no specialization. No specialization meaning that almost half were open to all the co-workers working in specialized in different sectors. So there wasn't a kind of barrier to the entry of co-workers. They were mainly located in the Fuori Salone Design Week area, because I don't know if you know this, but in Milan, in the month of April, usually this year because of COVID, it was cancelled, we have the Design Week. The Design Week is in the outside the city, let's say, so in the center of the city, in the fair exhibition area. But then in the afternoon, in the evening, there are many events within the city that are called Fuori Salone. These co-working spaces, the first co-working spaces were open just in these areas, where there is a high concentration, for instance, of architecture and design. If you see this map, Navigli, Tortona, this is an area where there are several events related to the Design Week. For people that know Milan, they know what I'm talking about. And therefore, the first working spaces were born there, were also in the city center, like Brera. Isola is, I don't know if you can, I hope you can read. And can you see my arrow? My cursor? Probably not.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we
so
can.
there is, sorry, what's going on? So we can see Isola no, I can't. Eccolo qua. Isola is also a neighborhood that has been gentrified. Usually Isola was a kind of labor force, let's say, neighborhood. it has been gentrified, and now it can be. I always I used to say that can be compared to Marais neighborhood in Paris. I don't know if you know Marais. Anyway, it's a creative, lively area. Indeed, since it has been gentrified, the real estate prices grew very much. But let's go a bit back. Okay, this is a map that can be also useful for you, showing the accessibility to the local public transport, where you have, it's written in Italian, but Molto Alta is very high. So you have a very high accessibility when the area is almost red, and very low when it's blue, light blue. And and then you see Rete Metropolitana, so metropolitan network, underground. And you saw also, even from this map, you can understand how the accessibility to local public transport is important. This is the first map of co-working spaces in Milan in 2016, sorry, no, not 14th, 2016. And you can see some agglomeration, as we said, in Isola, as we said, in Sarpi, where there is Chinatown, and where the video and video in firms in video are, and also music are concentrated. Then we have the design architecture in Tortona and Navigli, but also in Lambrate. Lambrate is also another design week area. And then we have some co-working spaces in Viale Monza, and the co-working spaces in Viale Monza are peculiar because they tend to be larger in size. Why? Because in Viale Monza, they occupy the previous industrial buildings. Therefore, they could have more spaces that was affordable to lower price. Viale Monza is very well connected because there is the underground, but still real estate prices are much lower than the city. You think that the Duomo is here, no, the central. So this is the central area. Brera is very expensive, and so on. But also this location of co-working spaces also can show the characteristics of Milan that became a that shows a multipolarity. No? So in Milan, the center is Duomo, yes, but there are new centers of the city. One is Garibaldi Repubblica, here next to Isola, where unfortunately, eccolo qua, Porta Nuova Garibaldi, unfortunately now we can't go there. Last year, the previous years during the summer school, we went with the students there. Anyway, where the new development area, there is the new development area with Unicredit skyscraper, with the Bosco Verticale, that is this one, Bosco Verticale, vertical forest, where several multinational firms located their main premises, like, for instance, Microsoft, Samsung, Google, Amazon, and also Microsoft opened a new co-working in its premise. This is very much related to the interest, but even yesterday we spoke about this, no? The lady from Vodafone, no? Said that multinational firms are more and more interested in co-working spaces, as the spaces where to attract also freelancers and people with whom, consultants with whom to work. Okay. About the location of co-working spaces in Milan, there is a correlation, let's say, of there is a proximity of these co-working spaces also to, for instance, the location of architectural firms. These are some maps that a student, a Chinese student that is doing a double degree, is made in her thesis. She will discuss the thesis next week. These are interesting maps showing for instance, the concentration of architectural industry and the concentration of performing arts. So you see that at the end, I mean, the clusters are the same. I thought there was another one. Anyway, looking at the analysis of the co-working space in 2016 in Milan underlined the importance of density of people and firms activities, and the functional and business mix, so a mix of activities in different sectors. So the importance of agglomeration economies, but also market size and market potential. Then the geographical proximity to university research and the research centers and accessibility. So this is very much related to skilled labor force and business opportunities. Then we tried to cluster these co-working spaces in Milan according to the similarities. And we should do it again for the new analysis, the new survey that we did in 2019. But the survey in 2016 showed that 3 clusters can be identified. The first is composed by large and innovative co-working spaces. So where there is a high correlation between the size of the co-working space, the real estate price, and the premises. For instance, as I said, in Viale Monza, these were former productive buildings. And also, because of their size, these co-working spaces manage events. When tomorrow we will talk about the effects of co-working spaces on the co-workers, direct effects, and on the local environment, where the neighborhood, indirect effects. And we will say that thinking about the business model of co-working spaces, the organization of events, most of the time, is one of the main is a very important in the turnover of the co-working space, because the co-working space can gain from this activity of organizing events. Then there is the second cluster that is composed by small and office-like, we call them, co-working, that are specialized in a specific sector, that are located mainly in apartment buildings, that are located in an area where the real estate price is high, are indeed mainly in the central business districts, in Duomo, in Brera, and in the Fuori Salone areas, also because several of Fuori Salone areas are also in Brera, in Duomo, and so on. And then there is a third cluster composed by medium and in between, let's say, co-working, between cluster 1 and cluster 2, are medium-sized co-working. About 60% are specialized in a specific sector, are mainly in apartment buildings. Less than half organized events are in area with medium real estate price, and about 6% are in the Fuori Salone areas. So this classification can be useful for you that will analyze the co-working spaces in Milan. So can be also useful to see whether the co-working space you analyze belong to one of these clusters, or perhaps you find another typology of co-working spaces, because we did this analysis a few years ago. So if we think about the effects of these clusters on the neighborhood where they are located, we might, and this is our hypothesis, and that we tested via surveys to the survey to co-working managers, that cluster 1 is composed by large and innovative co-working spaces. So we expect them to have a better, higher impact on the neighborhood. Cluster 2, that is composed by small and office-like co-working spaces, is more, we think that will not have a real impact. And when we talk about office-like, is because everything now is co-working spaces, but this is not true. To be a co-working space, you have to be a specific structure. You have to build, as a co-working manager, a community inside the co-working space. You have to enhance the relationship and the contacts among the co-workers, because the idea is that being collocated improves and improves the business opportunities. And as we will show you tomorrow, we did specific analysis on the effects of the different proximity forms in the within the co-workers, and we found that co-workers experiencing social proximity, well, geographical proximity is obvious because they share not the same office space. But social proximity, institutional proximity, meaning lifestyle, cognitive proximity, or organizational proximity improves the economic performance and also improves the well-being. That is also another analysis I did with Mina. We will speak about you tomorrow. So what is the correlation between size, premises, and costs, and which can be the impact on the urban space? This might be also an answer that you might provide in the exercise you will do about co-working spaces. So this is the new analysis we ran in 2019. We found that some neighborhood, some NIL increased the number of co-working spaces, like Isola, Sarpi, Tortona. Some others are new areas. For instance, the area of, you will see better here, now the cluster F, Porta Romana, Vicentina, Scalo Romana, is as a green, a darker green, in dark green, because there has been a 100% of growth of co-working spaces, because let's say there were no co-working spaces in a way. Other areas now, for instance, Duomo, Guastalla had an increase. Okay, while in Garibaldi Isola there has been a small increase, but sorry, moment. Okay, sorry, because there was a telephone. So there was a small increase. However, the concentration of Isola and Sarpi in terms of number of co-working spaces is higher. So you can see that in this period of time, there are some areas, some neighborhoods more attractive than others. Sorry. Okay. So discussion and policy implications. So first of all, we realized, we understood, as the literature also says to us, but also our analysis on Milan underline that co-working is mainly an urban phenomenon, because co-working are knowledge-intensive places for creative people. They are mainly located in larger urban areas, but notable exceptions exist in rural and less dense areas. If we refer to the research by Andrés Rodríguez Pose of the London School of Economics, here the question is, Can co-working spaces be considered a tool to foster socio-economic growth in peripheral and inner areas in Italy? So a tool for the growth of places that are called areas, places that don't matter. This can be an issue, to investigate. Also, because a co-working space can be an incubator of firms. Now, there are some co-working spaces like the one you will. That will make a presentation today, Avanzi Barra, is an incubator also of firms. And then thinking about co-working spaces in peripheral areas, this can be related to the compensation hypothesis, meaning that entrepreneurs of small and vulnerable firms located in most cities make particular use of social capital in co-working space to compensate their shortfall in knowledge and resources. So the idea is that in the city there is much more competition. In a peripheral area, you can find in the model of co-working space an advantage. Can be the model of a co-working space can result in can compensate, let's say, the disadvantages of being remote with the atmosphere inside the co-working space that can improve the performance, can improve the life, the quality of life, can also improve the home life balance and so on. Therefore, a role can be an important role, can be assumed by the government, the public actor, public player, which should propose tailored policies. For instance, subsidizing startups and fostering the development of the sense of community within the co-working space. Indeed, this is a sentence about co-working spaces saying if you sit a strong and a weak performer next to each other, the weaker employee performs much better and the stronger employee's performance doesn't decline much at all. Okay, so I thank you for having given me the opportunity to make the presentation. I probably have 1 minute in which I just will tell you who I am because I didn't say that. Can you see me? Yes, because okay. So I'm a associate professor of urban regional economics at the Department of Architecture and Urban Planning, and yes, so since 4 years, 5 years, we started to working on this, studying this issue of co-working spaces, and as you know, we got some funds for this cost action that is joining that is collaborating with this summer school event, and recently we also got another fund of the ITN Marie Curie project, and we starting from next year, January next year, we will start a call of PhD positions, very, very well paid, because Marie Curie gives a lot of very good salary to PhD students. And so in case when the positions, the call will be out, I will make it circulate. Also because we need for this ITN project PhD students that are not Italian, that because we are 6 universities, and Polytechnic of Milan will have 2 PhD students, and these shouldn't be Italians and shouldn't have studied in Italy. So, I mean, for the one of you that are not Italian that would like to start a PhD position, I mean, you are welcome. But we will keep in touch, and you will also, if you follow our cost action, we will advertise these positions. Okay, thank you. And if you have questions, please.
This is the moment, if there are any questions. Otherwise, I think we can invite Stefania to show up. And hello, Stefania.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
Good afternoon. Yeah.
Good afternoon. If you wanted to start with your self-introduction, and maybe you were not here before, but I anticipated what you're talking about, and so you can start.
Yes, I joined Ilaria's lecture, but I wasn't here before. So, Hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to this summer school. I'm Stefania Fiorentino. I am a teaching fellow at University College London, so specifically at the Bartlett School of Planning. And I am involved with amongst the other MSc in urban regeneration, and I did my PhD at UCL, looking at new entrepreneurial ecosystems, and my which included, of course, co-working spaces, maker spaces, or spaces for startups. And the focus of that study was Rome, and then I continued looking at new working spaces. So I'll share my screen probably. Let me see if you can properly see it widescreen.
We can see it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and what I'm gonna talk about today, it's a little bit an overview of two very different cities, which are London and Rome. So the city in which I live and I currently lead research, and the one that was the object of my PhD. And what I'd like to talk about is how co-working spaces, or new workspaces in that sense, flexible office space, and I'll lead you through all these different terminologies during the talk, have some similarities and some differences. So the approach we got was looking at what originated these trends and which would be the possible trends in the future from urban regeneration perspective and a real estate perspective. So we all know that, and some of these has already been introduced by Ilaria, so I'm not gonna repeat it, but briefly, co-working trends, or the need for affordable spaces or shared space, has originated by a number of factors. The first one is probably globalization and an increasing mobility of jobs and of people, and the discussion around originated by Enrico Moretti about the new geography of jobs, and certain cities that were providing a number of better opportunities for jobs, and then how human capital was distributed among certain specific cities, and what Florida said as well, as Ilaria has highlighted about the creative class. Yeah. Then the second kind of big factor was the global financial crisis that created a number of changes and challenges in the labor pooling, so with increasing numbers of freelancing and increasing rates of unemployment, especially in certain parts of the world. Now this map, this chart here shows the situation across Europe, and for example the UK is here, so it has lower number of freelancing, whereas Greece or Italy are on the other side of the chart. So that means that freelancing is higher, and that's probably because traditional jobs are lower in that sense. But beside the sort of labor trends, there's a trend which relates to also the new technologies, the Industry 4.0. So, for example, 3D printing and all these kind of new technologies, but also the internet and new and the increasing pace of changes. So innovation happens quicker, let's say. And well, finally, of course, the COVID-19 emergency, which is sort of adding up another layer of possible changes in the workspaces scenario. And just to give you an idea, this is also a phenomenon that is rapidly changing. When I started my PhD, that was 2015, and in the last 5 years, the number of co-working spaces across the globe has peaked, and just to I did a little research on the date in which the Wikipedia page for co-working was first created, and that was only on the 17th of September 2019, so about a year ago or so. So that means that on one side, this phenomenon is changing and growing quickly, and on the other, if Wikipedia has a page for co-working, that means also that it's becoming part of our culture in a way that nowadays almost everyone knows what a co-working space is, whereas in 2015 it was sort of quite a blurry concept. And if you would refer to someone, for example, in Italy from the real estate industry about this word, they wouldn't know exactly what it entailed. And the other sort of big message that I wanted to show you in this slide is, of course, that the terminology and co-working spaces are usually associated to startup culture, even though it doesn't necessarily mean that in a co-working space you've got facilities for startups, but the two things have proceeded somehow on parallel, sometimes bridging words as well. And again, this relates to what we've seen earlier about increasing uncertainties in traditional jobs as well, and or increasing technologies. And sometimes co-working space can also look like this. So in a way, they can look like containers, really. But there are a number of ways to make co-working cool in a way, and in this case is the branding strategies that they have adopted, for example. So coming to the geographical location of co-working spaces, or the way this phenomenon has spread across the world, again we see that this map is from 2016, I believe. I missed the reference, sorry, that it was there. Yes, it's 2016. And there's a sort of stark and clear concentration in what used to be the developed world, so in part of the US and in Europe, alongside part of South America. This geography might have slightly changed in the last year, as it is a fast-growing phenomenon, but by and large it stays the same. So the concentration are in the traditional developed world. Why London and Rome now, after having introduced the framework? Well, there are, of course, practical reasons linked to me being from Rome and having studied in Rome and working in London. But there are also some other there's also a will of trying to look at two different real estate markets and try to understand which might be the reasons for success, so that afterwards it might be important, it might be useful to understand also how co-working space can support some other indirect effect in the local economy, or be supported by planning governance, for example, or dependent upon it. It depends from whether you're looking at the issue from a real estate point of view or a planning point of view. So As I said by now more than once, London and Rome are two very different real estate markets. On one side, there's London, which is probably the biggest or one of the biggest real estate market for real estate investments in the world. So, despite Brexit in 2019, London attracted up to 16 billion pounds of commercial real estate investment. So we are talking about anything that relates to office space and retail, really. And was ranked as #1 global destination for real estate investment. So that there's an actual problem in London with the financialization of that real estate capital. And there's also an area in the city of London, which is the City of London, which has this cluster of high-rise building where the demand for office space is quite high as well, and that has seen in the last year also an increasing number in flexible office space and co-working space. And I just put here some pictures of typical office space within the City of London. That's Aldgate Tower, where a big built environment firm is located, and that's the way the developer and now the management company of this skyscraper that hosts within it also WeWork, so advertise the office space within the tower. And as you can see, you can barely see some desk spaces here, but all the other pictures share images of shared spaces, people that socialize among each other, and like people different types of social activities as well. And that's becoming increasingly common, a common way of advertising spaces. So you can barely see desk spaces, really. I'm gonna come back to that later on. On the other side, there's Rome. So as I said, if London is sort of a typical location for foreign investment in real estate, Rome is instead at the other side of the bar. It was ranked as a new entrant in 2016. The year after, it was already considered with the wider regional area, so not just Rome, but it's an emerging sort of space for real estate investment, and that's because there's usually a good balance between affordability, so foreign investors can buy very good properties in Rome and very good office properties, and the sort of risk is also quite profitable for a foreign investor, in the sense that they have potential to make good margins in Rome. But on the other side, it's not all positive, and it's a quite difficult market as well. So the Financial Times had at some point an article they find the sort of process of searching an office for an SME in Rome, just like a runner who trains with weight on their backpack. So like those people here, basically. And that's, of course, not a good start if you want to run a new company, really, and you already have to overcome such a high obstacle, which is setting up your own office. But beside that, Rome also have an enormous potential in the cultural and creative sector, and has a tradition in the construction sector as well, which, as I said, is now struggling to provide jobs. So in a way, these new trends and the new entrepreneurial ecosystem, so the startup world, you can define it as you wish in that sense, but this possibility for new small enterprises to set to settle in the city represent a way for the city to regenerate itself or to reposition itself in a new economic sector. And there's a real need for jobs, other than attracting also many people from the south of Italy. So in a way, the contrast between London and Rome is also it doesn't stand only in having two different real estate markets, but also in having two different necessities in terms of employment. So then that changes also the type of firms that will settle into this kind of co-working spaces or flexible office spaces. So now I'm just going to show you some data coming from my PhD research. And as some of you might be familiar with, in Italy, there has been a startup pact, or has been defined as startup act later on, that from 2012 granted some special fiscal benefits to innovative startups. And this map from 2016 sort of shows the spatial concentration of these startups in the regional territory of Rome. And as you can see, most of it is undoubtedly an urban phenomenon. So most of these companies are settled in what is considered to be the inner city. So until here, really nothing new. It's just that you have to imagine that those companies are startups. So they would have started their business in the last 2 years. They probably have low initial capitals, so not a lot of money to spend. And they don't know whether they will be on the market for long. So there's a high potential rate of failure as well. So in that sense, it's a high risk to set up an own office on their own. And if you go back to the article that I showed you from the Financial Times, it's also great hassle to have to go through running with your backpack on while training so that you can have an up and running office space. So that created throughout the year an increasing demand for co-working spaces, clearly, or that's what it was shown. This was the situation in 2015. Now you have to imagine that the Startup Act also started in 2012, but the first observable consequences of that act of this new registry that was created started to be visible actually in 2015, because by the time that things were up and running, it took a couple of years, and then some other couple of years for the phenomenon to be established. So this was the situation in 2015. The red dots are co-working spaces that were present in the city of Rome. This is the situation the year after. And this is the situation in 2017. So as you can see, a lot more dots than from 2015. I think here we were in the scale of 10. Here we are in the scale of 50 spaces. So, 5 times more. That's quite a lot in 2 years. And also in this other map, you can see which are the areas for bigger concentration. So that's basically the same year, but with an analysis of which areas or neighborhood were interested the most by spaces, by shared spaces. Now you see in the key that there are some numbers, so co-working spaces type 1 and type 2. I'm gonna go there in a minute. Don't worry about that for now. But the main thing to notice here is that there's sort of a concentration in the central part of the city, and then some pockets across other neighborhoods, which are still inner city, but a little bit more peripheral. And of course, the transport nodes are important. So accessibility from main transport connection is an important factor, especially in a city like Rome that doesn't have the same public transports as London. Yeah. The other important variable that determined the location of those spaces was the behavior of local authorities. So whether they were granting subsidies or special partnerships and support towards certain particular co-working spaces manager or co-working space facilities. So the categorization that I gave of the different spaces I found in Italy was based on the role they hosted in urban regeneration processes or in triggering what, for example, Ilaria has defined as indirect effect in the local area. And the first space was what I labeled as the social incubator, or those kind of co-working spaces that had an important social innovation manifesto kind of approach, or that were fostering social inclusion in some ways and regeneration also within the areas in which they were located. And by that I mean a change in the local population type, for example. The second typology instead is the one more linked to the startup phenomenon. So they usually host startup incubators and they foster connection with venture capitals, or they might be participated by major firms. I don't know, for example, Facebook, Microsoft. Now, of course, you have to imagine that the reality of Rome is not like that of Milan either, or that of London. So, for example, now I think in the last year there's a space next to Termini Station that has a participation of Facebook. But yeah, in any case, spaces of this type in Rome might have the participation of also regional agencies like Lazio Nova, or major communication companies like Wind Telecom and Team Telecom. So these, of course, the major difference is the type of funding and the money that are put in those spaces, and then the possibilities also that the co-workers can get from it. And finally, the third typology that I found is really the commercial real estate product, so some sort of equivalent to WeWork, even though WeWork doesn't have any premise in Rome yet. And although that has less indirect effect in a way in terms of urban regeneration, it does have indirect effect in the local economy, because of course it's a way to generate local income anyway. And somehow the Roman dimension is quite particular in that sense, because there are also a lot of smaller real estate provider that have smaller co-working spaces. So just, okay, I've talked a lot, but just to give you an idea of how those spaces look like in Rome, that's the first type, the more social innovative one, and most of the times they use either garages like this one, that's a makerspace in the specific, but they can use also former premises of different types. Now this, I think, was a former warehouses in Pigneto, and it's quite a popular one, but yeah, as you can see, it's not very curated, or at least it has more like a scruffy kind of look. In this other case here, that's a former Coop office space, so basically office space of food supermarket and cooperative that were no longer in use and were in proximity to the actual supermarket hub, but no longer used. And they have a gym indoor as well, and a space for dancing. This again was probably a garage that was readapted for office space and then abandoned and reused. It's in San Lorenzo. This is the entrance of a co-working space that use a former area for a covered market. And that's the inside of this one, actually. Whereas, as you can see, there's already quite stark difference in the appearance of the second typology. Not gonna go into all the details here, but of course already the connection with venture capital generate the first consequences that there are more money to spend, and the second one is that there's also a sort of branding and marketing reason for it. So if I am a startupper, I want to be in an environment that it's that can be easily sold to a client. So I want to meet the client in an environment that represents my company in a way that doesn't look scruffy like the one before, for example. And then, yeah, so for example, this one was the team. So it's the telephone company in Italy, and so the branding also within the spaces is quite more curated. The third typology instead, it's the sort of real estate commercial product. The big provider in Rome is Regis, that has spaces also across the world. And again, here the branding side of it remains, but it's more like you need a space, you rent a space, and there's not much to add in that sense. Now, average users, Ilaria has already mentioned it. It's students, graduate, or in general, young professionals and startuppers in that sense. Or sometimes in Rome, it can be also mid-career professionals, so people that have lost their job and difficulty can reposition in a difficult way, can reposition themselves in the same sector or find another traditional job, and so they set up their own companies. Now, let's switch to London and let's see first which are the major sort of contextual dynamics that shape the commercial market in London, and then whether we can find the same typologies and how they are articulated. Yeah. So first of all, I thought I would give you an overview of what are the planning debates and what are the current issues in London, and differently from Rome that has an excess of vacant space in a way, but difficult to fit out and manage. In London, there's a shortage of space, and there are increasing inequalities across the different London boroughs as well. It is indeed a richer city, but it has problems of social inclusions and of pockets of poverty. And especially for young professionals, unless they are hired by a major companies, if they want to set up their own business, might be quite difficult and challenging in that sense. The other major planning challenge is that to respond to the housing crisis and the shortage of housing units and affordable housing units, there has been a trend in the local plan in increasing what are called permitted development rights. Now, I'm not going to go into much detail, but in sort of profiting and supporting easy conversions from office space to residential under a certain number of square meters, so that the housing supply was larger, but this was made reducing a number of small office space that instead were used by SMEs or by that were more affordable for SMEs, startups, and even freelancers. So there's an actual shortage, especially in certain boroughs, of local office space if you're not a multinational Yeah, and what happens is that most of the time light industrial factories or even workshops and labs look like this. So that's Old Kent Road, and that's an area that is full of shared courtyard like this, in which many different SMEs cooperate, and it looks like sort of industrial courtyard or backyard, but it's not. And the issue is that these are the only places that are affordable for those kind of firms. So the new challenge is that is reflected also in the new London plan, is supporting affordable workspaces, giving incentives or giving sort of a faster planning application to schemes that includes those kind of spaces, which usually tend to coincide also with co-working spaces. So we do find, if we look at the three categories that I've highlighted before for the case of Rome, we do find some similar ones in London as well, although here, as the real estate market is more mature, they look somehow more curated. There are much more, there's much more variety of it. And for example, in the social incubator, we switch from those like Impact Hub or Urban Room, which are run by private management company, but that are sort of situated or located in areas like the one I showed you before, or Brixton, so areas with a lot of social tensions and conflicts, where they get incentives for the social kind of services they also lead. And others which are more kind of publicly led in a way, like the one that is used to be like the maker space that used to be settled in London City Hall, or a lot of other spaces which are settled in local libraries as well. But the big sort of an important and raising phenomenon is that linked to meanwhile uses. So those pieces of land that are set for new developments, and that within the space between the land is designated for new development and the time in which planning application is granted and site starts, so the construction works really start. That area is usually destined to meanwhile use that can take different shapes. Now, in this case, the first one is Place Ladywell, and it's a modular housing and affordable office space scheme, which was supposed to last only a couple of years, and it's by Roger Steer Architecture, so it became soon very famous for the particular technologies that were used, and so the borough decided to keep it in a way, or they're still studying ways to keep it, because of course the material were designed not to last so long, but it's still there and it's quite famous. And they have a lot of work spaces which are rented out at affordable rates. The second one is in Wood Green instead. Is again another peripheral area of London, like Lewisham, for example. So they tend to attract more sort of local workforce. In this case, those are again temporary hubs for creative industries, hospitalities, artist workshops. But in this case, development is going forward, so this space will be relocated once the construction site starts. But it's a way for if you are a sort of a co-working space manager or someone that needs an affordable space, it's quite cheap to build one of these. At the same time, it's a way for the local borough to bring people in the area and start populating it and creating the buds for the new developments that will come, for example. In this other case, this instead is in central London, is close to King's Cross and Pancras or Euston Square. to be more specific, and that's a former school, but it's an area set up for development. It's next to where the new high-speed line will arrive, and they still have to decide whether they will knock down the building or keep it. In the meantime, they are providing affordable spaces for small enterprises and even some living spaces, so housing units somehow. The other trend is the co-location of office, light industrial and housing. Usually they reuse for very large former industrial estate. In this case, this was a chocolate factory. And again, the sort of new trend is that to co-locate this type of different uses, we need new typologies in a way, and not always they work well. This is a successful case, but there's much more to be studied in that sense. And yeah, I should have mentioned that in this case, this is a sort of a hybrid between the various typologies that I showed you, because it comes it kind of brings together all the different types. Whereas for the second one, well, so the startup incubator, that's a quite strong kind of typology in London. Of course, financial capitals and venture capitals are quite strong. And the trend is that major corporations like Google are taking over this kind of sector of shared office space. The major driver was the development of tech cities, so a number of planning regulations that granted a number of incentives of startup incubators and startups that were locating in East London, in Shoreditch area, but now it's not anymore specifically clustered in that East London area. It's more like a spread phenomenon across all central London. And what the trend is that startup incubators are becoming more and more specialized in specific sectors. So horizontally integrated in that sense. And for example, there's one incubator for only fintech companies, or the one in the picture here is dedicated to retail and consumer services, alongside the ones, as I mentioned already, from Microsoft, Google, so the big multinationals. Yeah. And finally, there's the third and biggest typology, which is basically the real estate product. And in this case, London, I think, is one of the biggest city in selling this type of spaces. We work as, I don't know, many anymore spaces within the city, then the second home. So the characteristic that this bigger provider display, all of them, is that, again, you barely see desks in this picture and in the way they advertise their spaces, and that's because they are increasingly selling an experience. They're selling a type of brand that the company can then reuse with their clients rather than a desk. So, like one of the ones that were about to open before the COVID-19 emergency, Utopia, was advertised as the perfect workspace experience, a place of supreme happiness. And I mean, how many of you would you want to be working in a place of supreme happiness? I bet you all would want to. But at the same time, you can use, I mean, the best designers and the best architects, but it's still a working place, right? So you see the marketing element here is becoming predominant in a way. And when they do show by mistake the space and how it looks like, not always is so glossy as the one you saw so far. So I mean, there's a stark difference from here to here. And I assure you that if you go to the website of this particular co-working space, you'll find images of the grocery corner, the socializing space. So in a way, the desk space is the less important kind of area within this type of co-working space. In this specific case, this one is the co-working space of the Ministry of Sound, which is one of the most famous clubs in London, and it's a co-working space that targets people working in the music industry, or this particular niche of music of the music industry. So they got a bit creative also in the kind of offer they had. They have a tequila bar in the ladies' restroom, for example. And yeah, they advertise their spaces as 120 centimeter of dark gray heaven in a shared space. Now, I wouldn't necessarily refer to this desk as a dark gray heaven, but I just would like to draw your attention on this 120 centimeter, which is not exactly a lot of space for a desk space that you would pay £500 a month. So what, and if you look at the floor plan of WeWork, again, it looks a little bit like a chicken cage. I mean, not that every employee has a lot of space here. So the natural question here is, what are those spaces really selling, and why are companies and people increasingly renting spaces in WeWork or flexible office space? If then you pay a lot of money to have just a desk, or most of the time a system of hot desking, or just a space within such a big office, sharing it with a lot of other companies. Well, there are a number of benefits from it, especially in a city like London. And the trend is that flexible office spaces are the new kind of requirement and the new upcoming demand. So not necessarily co-working spaces, we're talking about flexible office spaces, and companies even like HSBC are renting spaces within them. And in this case, WeWork is sort of the most well-known brand for it. But coming back to the benefits. So first of all, there's a very big reduction in fit-out costs. So if you go back to the article from the Financial Times on Rome, London doesn't have, in a way, the same sort of barriers as Rome, but still, if you are a new company and you imagine to go through all the hassle of looking for a suitable office to rent, going through all the guarantees and the checks that the real estate agencies will do on yourself and on how much you are able to pay as a rental income, and all the sort of securities you can give as a tenant, and then setting up all the utilities, so electricity, broadband, water supplies, things like that. And if you are a startup, you don't even know how long you'll be on the market, whether your firm will be successful. That's a very high cost to pay, which instead is not. You don't have to sustain if you go and work in a local, in a flexible office hub in a way. Then the other thing is shorter lease terms. So if you're a startup, you don't have to commit yourself in a lease, and then if you fail, you don't have to commit yourself in having to break the clause of the lease. I'm reaching conclusion.
Okay, great.
Yeah. And you don't have obligations with the landlord as well, so that gives all the companies an increasing flexibility as well with R&D, so research and development expenditure, for example, in the case of HSBC, deciding to rent part of WeWork. And then for the users instead, there's access to network, technology and services, as well as possibility of renting central spaces, which otherwise you wouldn't have. So now, which are the next challenges in a way? Next challenges relate to what would be the future of working spaces in London and Rome after COVID-19, and whether and also whether the same sort of consideration can apply also to more peripheral markets and areas. Now, the first results, again, I'm going to be quick, shows that, for example, if we look at the case of WeWork, in April, there was the WeWork was hit by a rise in unpaid rent. So they suggest that, again, as for example, previously in the past as well, the first kind of result was, of course, those spaces were closed, and they would have been they would have a loss in income, and they might not survive. But instead, already more recently, that's an article from 2 days ago, WeWork goes back on track for profits for 2021, and that's because the new trend is that companies like MasterCard, Microsoft, Citigroup, and TikTok have signed new leases. So they decided to rent part of WeWork premises already. And that's because if the trend is that people will increasingly work from home, then it means that companies can save in renting traditional office space, but they would still need a certain number of office space and desks for those people that instead need to run the office. And as they are uncertain on the future, they can have all the benefits that I've highlighted before by renting a space in WeWork. At the same time, other employees from other companies like Facebook, Google, and Amazon, they might decide to rent a desk within WeWork, and some of them have already done it, certain days of the week to when they have problem with childcare or any sort of other issue by working from home. So the trend here is confirmed in a way. Increasing flexible office space will have increasing success in a way, and they are showing possibility of remaining resilient on the market as well. The other trend instead that is likely to stay is relating to social inclusion and possibility for urban regeneration in certain specific lagging areas of the city. Now, for example, this is an example from Brussels, which was supposed to be my next case. Not gonna go in much detail because of time. I'm just gonna close with this last slide that highlights which are the new trends in terms of shared office space for the future. And one relates to the possibility of becoming part of public offer of facilities, of course, with different possibilities for private-public partnerships to support socioeconomic regeneration in certain areas. And this applies to testing their business plan in more peripheral areas. And the other one instead is the flexible office space and the way even bigger companies might rent space in co-working spaces to allocate for the changing dynamics of work place patterns. Yeah, I've already said that. I can skip it. So I've reached the end of the presentation, and if you have any questions, I'm here.
Yes, thank you, Stefania. It was great. Really, thank you for your very passionate and extensive talk. It was very interesting, and we have actually some questions that you might want to answer, maybe to read yourself, because it's a pretty long question here in the chat that is especially directed to you, but maybe if the other speakers want also to contribute to the answer, they're welcome, of course.
Yes, so there's the very long one is from Emmanuel. Yeah. I often talk to many co-working space managers and owners that offer both type 1 and type 3 services in their space, and it seems that people, at least Brazilian people, think they want to co-work, but what they actually are looking for is to work privately in a space that looks like a co-working, but with little involvement. Even if they are independent workers who are 2-3 people team. I wonder if this happens because the real estate product is indeed a viable solution, or because for some cultural organization reason people are not yet sufficiently empowered with the sharing mindset. Do you have any thoughts? Okay. Yes, I do. I think I wouldn't necessarily say that it's a cultural or organization reason. I think that increasingly, if there's a need, that if the space is big enough, you're right, there are overlapping possibilities and combinations between, I don't know, type 1 and 2 or 2 and 3. So there are spaces that might have a real estate kind of approach, and then have within themselves also startup incubators. And there are also a lot of spaces, to answer your question, a lot of studies, that shows that people get distracted by sharing and by being in such open space kind of approach, like the WeWork, for example. But that's what flexible offices in London trying to address in a way. They have different solutions within themselves. So you can either rent an individual space, or if you are in the condition of working from home 3 days a week and only having to go to the office once a week for networking or other kind of reasons, you can instead rent a hot desking. So in that sense, you can choose. Not sure if that answers the question, but I think the trend and the reason why, especially in London, we are increasingly talking about flexible office space rather than co-working space is exactly to answer your question and to sort of respond to different needs and different types of demand, but in a flexible way, because then if you are a provider, you can easily, move the desk and provide more individual space if there's more demand for desks, or more hot desking if instead the demand goes more towards the other side. And on the other side, if you have HSBC that rents out half of your flexible office space in central London, then it's easy to just put stickers on and dedicate half of that floor plan to HSBC, for example. I hope I did answer the question. If not,
Thank you,
maybe.
Stefania. I think so. In case not, maybe Emmanuel himself can, come up and ask any other clarifications. I don't know if Ilaria or Mina want to add anything on what you just said.
Okay.
Great. This is our
Arianna. She's right now because she sleeps from 2 to 4. But in the morning, I have the babysitter. In the afternoon, no, she sleeps only 2 hours in the afternoon. She's awake now, so this is how I continue working.
Arianna, she's the youngest participant in our summer school. It's great.
Just she's not really sorry.
Okay, very nice.
Thank you. So
Yes.
thank you all, Ilaria, Mina, and Stefania, for your very interesting presentations. I would leave Ilaria 5 minutes to just introduce the exercise, so then the participants can manage their breaks however they want, and then we will start reviewing their works in, I guess, 1 hour, 1 hour and a half from now.
Okay, Chiara, can you see my screen?
I can see your screen. I would stop the recording.
Okay. Okay, and then if